Thank you. Hopefully we can have you back for that, too. With that, the gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes, Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry and Ranking Member Waters, for holding this hearing, and I thank you to our witnesses for taking time to be here with us today. I want to dive right in. About $1.7 trillion in securities of China-based issuers are listed on exchanges in the United States. Mr. Willems, as China continues to bolster its efforts to compete with the U.S. for capital, do you think U.S. investors have adequate information to understand their exposure to Chinese capital markets and the risks associated with them?
So let me first say that I don't think inherently we don't want any Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges. As long as they play by the rules, it's good for us because it bolsters the importance of our markets. That said, I don't think U.S. citizens generally understand what they're getting into with some of those investments, and more transparency could be helpful.
So some managers offer single country funds that only invest in Chinese-related issuers. Among the risks listed in these funds, or these types of funds, are more frequent trading suspensions and government intervention, currency exchange rate fluctuations or blockages, price volatility, and considerable degrees of social, legal, regulatory, political, and economic uncertainty. Mr. Willems, are you concerned about the risks associated with offering an investment product with that much exposure to China?
So I do think that having disclosure about that is important so investors can make the decision.
So, and I want to open this up to the rest of the panel. Would it make sense to require all funds, including broader international and regional funds, to disclose and aggregate their exposure to Chinese-related risks and investments? Anybody that wants to speak up? Start with you, Mr. Willems, since I've already...
I mean, I think in concept having transparency is important. In terms of the specifics of what you're proposing, I think I'd want to think about that.
Anyone else care to remark?
Yeah, I'll echo Mr. Williams' comment. I do think transparency is very important, but I think there's obviously a balance between wanting to provide for that transparency and not creating a regime where there's overly onerous disclosure requirements as well.
So, and I think about my own posture as an investor, but so I'll ask the question this way to kind of press this further. Do current disclosure regimes adequately alert U.S. retail investors and retirees to their Chinese exposure? Yes or no? We'll start over here. Yes, no.
I think based on the response you're getting, it's a question that needs to be addressed. It's certainly
as an investor, I think the answer is no. I mean, I have been pressing my own investment advisor about that, and so then what can or should be done to improve the level of visibility that individual investors, U.S. investors, have to the exposure that they have to China that they may or may not be aware of? Anyone have any thoughts?
I think I've already offered the idea of greater transparency. How you do that is important, and I think that is a subject that we should delve into further.
All right, thank you. Well, I think it is insightful. I want to shift gears in the remaining minute and a half here. Mr. Fetto, if a foreign investor takes control of a U.S. business in the agricultural sector, does CFIUS have the authority to review that deal?
It certainly does.
And if a foreign investor were to take a non-controlling stake in an agricultural business, but gain influence over critical technologies or critical infrastructure as specified in rulemaking, would CFIUS have the authority to review that deal?
I imagine so, based on what you've described, yes.
And so when CFIUS reviews agricultural-related transactions, does CFIUS involve the U.S. Department of Agriculture in those reviews?
Yes, sir, it does. I mentioned earlier that they have the latitude under the law to bring in other cabinet member officials in their departments to provide the subject matter expertise to tackle the national security analysis, and they do that frequently with HHS and NASA and the Agricultural Department.
And do you think that CFIUS has adequate motivation to aggressively review those kinds of transactions?
They absolutely do, and that's part of the role of congressional oversight to make sure that they're adequately focused on those issues. I would caution, I'm not entirely sold on the idea of making the Agriculture Department a permanent voting member of the committee.
All right, thank you. I appreciate your questions. I yield back.